Good morning. I'm here today to announce details in respect of the Ministry of Tourism, Transport and Municipalities' proposed amendments to the Motor Car Act 1951 that speaks to the types of vehicles proposed for use as rental vehicles in Bermuda. The Motor Car Amendment No. 2 Act 2016 is scheduled to be debated in the House this Friday, which follows the tabling of the bill on Friday of last week. The incentive behind the proposal to broaden the types of vehicles for rent on the island is twofold. Firstly, allowing tourists the option of renting a motorized vehicle other than a scooter will make us more competitive with other jurisdictions. Tourists, like all of us, want options. Not all of them feel safe driving a scooter, but would still like to remain autonomous when it comes to exploring our beautiful island. Secondly, and most importantly, this is an issue of safety. Gone are the days of thousands of tourists weaving on relatively empty roads on mopeds, leisurely exploring Bermuda. Practically any local person can tell you an anecdotal horror story about witnessing a floundering tourist come off a rental scooter. And depending on the severity of the accident, that could be a person's holiday ruined. I personally witnessed in 2011 a woman lose her leg in front of her family in Somerset when she collided with a bus. It was devastating for her and her entire family who had to see that. I take this opportunity to stress that we are taking a very conservative approach to this initiative, and there will be many restrictions in place in terms of which vehicles can be used for this venture. We currently have shortlisted about 10 makes of vehicle which we feel will be appropriate for this purpose, all of which are private car A-class in size or smaller in terms of dimensions. However, the engine sizes and horsepower of the vehicles for consideration, as outlined in the bill, essentially mean that they will be unable to take more than 2 passengers and have little to no capacity for carrying luggage of any kind. Whilst we have called the vehicles livery motor cars, they are more akin to quadricycles, although 3-wheeled vehicles are not excluded from consideration. The proposed act is very clear that the design or build of the body of a livery motor car will be regulated and controlled so as to be conducive to road safety in Bermuda, and so as to preserve as far as possible the amenities of Bermuda. They will have to go through rigorous testing in order to be deemed suitable. There will also be restrictions in place as to what a potential motor car livery business would look like and how it should operate. For example, for an individual to establish a motor car livery business, that person must have a license to operate a motor car livery, which can be obtained on written application to the minister. It will be an offense to operate a motor car livery without such a license. That license will expire 1 calendar year after the date of issue, which will essentially mean that TCD inspectors will examine a proposed site and their operations before recommending to the minister the granting of such a license. Additional provisions listed in the bill specify that the minister may grant or refuse a license to operate a livery, subject to any terms and conditions deemed appropriate, and the minister may at any time vary the conditions attached to a license. In considering an application, the suitability of the premises from which it is intended to operate a livery, the suitability of the equipment in such premises, and the qualification of the staff which is proposed to employ in the operation of the livery will all be taken into account. The minister will have the power to revoke a license if it appears that there's been a material change in the suitability of the premises, equipment, or staff connected with the livery since the license was granted, or that the licensee has not complied with any of the conditions attached to their license. Additionally, no livery motor car will be permitted to be rented to a person under the age of 18 years or a person who does not hold a valid driver's license. The ministry hopes to begin work on the regulations this summer should the bill be successful, which will outline further criteria for the proposed industry, and we shall consult with the various stakeholders further so there's a further understanding of the types of vehicles that may be licensed prior to the regulations being put into operation. Let me now address a number of issues that have arisen in the last day or so as a direct result of misinformation being spread by the Shadow Minister of Transport, who I note has not made a single call or sent any email to the ministry seeking clarification before speaking to the media. This bill has not been brought to benefit any MP or senator of the One Bermuda Alliance. It is wholly disingenuous to suggest something like this. In fact, this was directly spoken to by MP Glenn Smith in today's Daily. This scheme will not have a detrimental effect on the taxi industry. The types of vehicles we are talking about are small. As I have outlined, the CCs of the vehicles under consideration simply would be unable to handle any more than a driver and even a passenger. In fact, visitor numbers are increasing, and in my view, they will continue to do so. Any small number of persons that may use one of the new vehicles will be offset by the rising number of tourists very easily. The numbers on the road will be small. These vehicles are not inexpensive and would need to be properly stored, and each livery would need to be approved by the minister. The shadow minister would have you believe that thousands of vehicles will be suddenly on Bermuda's roads. That is frankly impossible, given the way in which the regulations will be drafted, and indeed the fact that these vehicles need to be stored. In point of fact, even if an existing livery invested heavily in newly approved vehicles, they would need a place to park those vehicles, most likely on their existing site, which would be far less in number than the number of scooters they currently possess. This legislation was not brought by stealth. There have been ongoing discussions for many years about increasing the types of vehicles that might be made available to support our tourism industry. We have not elected to go with a full car rental piece of legislation, since it simply would not make sense. Rather, we have chosen a halfway house to give an additional, safer options to our visitors. We need to decide whether we are in the tourism industry and give opportunities for Bermudians across the board to engage in servicing that industry. This scheme will do exactly that. In fact, the only place that I am personally aware that does not allow anything other than a scooter for rent is Capri, Italy. As regards parking, whilst the types of vehicles we are talking about are small, they would use a regular parking space. However, by the very nature of the vehicle size requirements laid out in the proposed act, there would not be a detrimental effect on the number of spaces available overall. Put simply, the number of licensed vehicles on the road has decreased from a peak in 2008 of 51,215 to 47,692 in 2015, a difference of 3,523 vehicles. So there certainly is parking capacity, especially since you're talking about limited numbers of new livery vehicles, not thousands. The bill will provide new opportunities for Bermudian entrepreneurs to engage in the tourism industry and fill a gap in the market. In our heyday, we had in excess of 6,000 livery vehicles on the road. Today, that number is approximately 2,000. With tourism numbers on the rise, Bermudians will benefit. Finally, we have reached out this morning to the two largest taxi operator associations so the ministry can meet with them and alleviate any concerns. I'm confident this initiative will benefit Bermudian entrepreneurs and will be an asset to our tourism product. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
I was under the impression that it would require people who wanted to rent a car to use a local licensing situation. They'd have to get a local driving license. So from what you say, that's not true.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that impression came. Yeah, no, that doesn't mean it's true because it was on ZBM. I certainly didn't say that. What we're saying is it's much like renting a livery cycle. You present your driver's license from the jurisdiction from which you come, and if that's a suitable driver's license in accordance with the existing types of regulations, then that would be sufficient. Again, you'd have to be 18 years or older in this particular instance.
Would also be required to have a practice in the
Well, we'll flesh that out in the actual regulations, but I would, in my view, that probably is something that we'd be putting into place, something that demonstrates that someone actually has an understanding of which side of the road they're driving on and those kinds of things.
What kind of numbers are you really thinking about? 10, 20, 30, 40?
Well, I mean, in the first instance, again, given the fact that you're looking at very specific types of vehicles, and I don't want to take everything away that's going to be debated in the House tomorrow, or Friday, I should say. But as I said, there's only about 10 that we think would even fit into this category, and we'll see how things go during that period of time. How many they can import at one time will be dependent on the type of livery that they have. And what I mean by that is if you take a small livery cycle business that has capacity maybe for 100 cycles, and that's the center that they wish to use, there's a very limited amount of space there for them to actually put vehicles. So they may be limited to 5. It's going to be each dependent on its application. Yeah.
Would the vehicles you're talking about be available for residents to private?
No, what residents would be able to rent those from a livery, much like a local can rent a livery cycle right now. But in terms of ownership, no, that's not in this agenda.
Do you have any ideas in terms of prices for the vehicles, per day or per hour?
I do not. Again, I think this is the other thing that could be restrictive in a way, given the question. If you look at, say, a livery cycle is on average about $70 a day. For a livery cycle, for something that's 4 wheels, I would imagine the price is going to be more than that. And we'll explore whether that's something that actually needs to be regulated, but I doubt we'd regulate that particular piece of it. That will be up to those businesses to see what is profitable for them.
Any further questions?
I have to tell you there has been behind the scenes among members who are OVA driven some disquiet about this. I don't know if they've been properly briefed or you've missed the boat on communication.
No, I think that with any proposal that comes forward, with any bill, no one is ever going to be on the same page. Everyone has a different view, but there's a consensus, and that is why the bill has been tabled. So, individuals who may speak to the media, they're fully entitled to their opinion, but I would anticipate that we would get full support from our party in the House of Assembly.
I'm not sure what I missed, but there has been accusations that perhaps there's a conflict of interest in that the ruling party has at least 2 members with interest in car dealerships, namely Dr. Gibbons and Glenn Smith.
What I did say in my statement is that this legislation is not in any way aimed to benefit members of this party, whether they're MPs or senators. It's a shame that the first thing out of the block, without a single phone call being made, is muckraking, because that's what that is pure muckraking, and is casting aspersions on individuals with absolutely no foundation of any kind whatsoever. You'll have seen in today's Daily, and I apologize for making mention to another news organization, but MP Glenn Smith made it very clear indeed about the types of vehicles that his company brings in, all of which are 800cc or above. These vehicles are 150cc or below and are completely unrelated. He brings in cars. These are, as I've said, more or less quadricycles, and we will also examine 3-wheeled vehicles. So I dismiss that wholeheartedly. The MPs that have been wrongly accused, I am sure, will equally dismiss that out of hand. And I find it interesting that those kind of remarks can be made when at the same time there's other members from the Progressive Labor Party who also have interests in different things. So, it's nonsense.
You mentioned having witnessed a tourist lose her leg. There's been a lot of talk about the feasibility of renting cycles to tourists in light of Bermuda's changing traffic. What's your views on that as transport minister?
The roads are not as safe as they could be, far from it. And over the years, we've seen an increase in the size of vehicles on the road. We've seen an increasing number, although we're not anywhere near the peak that we were in 2008. I think that the feeling that maybe people have of using a cycle has obviously changed over the years. That's indicated by the diminishing number of these vehicles on the road. With any of these, you're giving options to tourists, and if in fact it turns out that this becomes something that's a little bit more popular, then accommodation by those livery rental cycle facilities would have to be made in kind. It will be up to these businesses to decide what's best for them. We're giving an option. But remember, the way in which a livery cycle or a livery will operate in terms of how they have these types of vehicles and the space that's actually available have to be taken into account.
Do you have any concerns renting to Americans who drive on the other side of the road?
Do Americans have any concern renting to us when we go to the United States? No. I think with a very, perhaps with a more robust way of dealing with our guests when they come and look at these vehicles to rent them, I personally would like to see a little bit more effort gone into individuals getting in on a bike and making sure that they're well aware of what they're doing. I'm not always convinced, to be fair, it's just about being on the other side of the road. Most Bermudians have grown up riding a livery cycle or a scooter or some other bike. Most of our tourists these days have not.